informal and informative. So thanks again for coming. Also, Matt Garza's here. He's our director of college admissions, so he's all things college. And then my other two counselors are hiding, our other school counselors, and Karen Zellner-Riley and Leah Garrett, and I'm Susan. So we got the whole school counseling office here tonight.
We just don't want to be in the video.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I don't want to be the only one in the video.
There you go. You're it. You're the star.
That's right.
Thank you so much for coming.
Please, we appreciate being here, and thanks everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay. We're gonna attempt, we have a couple videos embedded in here. If you can't hear them, just let us know. We can bypass it and speak to it. We just tried to change it a little bit so you don't have to just listen to us talk about financial aid the whole time. But Evelyn and I have worked together for several years. To give you an idea, I work at Sallie Mae. I've been here for about 13 years. I live in Bethlehem. My kids go to Freedom High School, so I'm local to the area. But prior to joining Sallie Mae, I worked in financial aid. I actually worked at DeSales University. We did not overlap actually. And I also worked at Moravian College in the financial aid office. And Evelyn works at DeSales, and you used to be?
I used to be in New York. So, but I've been at DeSales for a little over 14 years.
So we bring a lot of knowledge, but again, we have a presentation, we use it as a guide, we'll provide this to your counseling office, so in follow-up, there's some links, there's some resources in there, if there's information, you can access it later. Stop us, please, ask questions. We don't want you to be bored. This is not an exciting subject, it's a nerve-wracking topic, right? How do I pay for education? And before we jump in, I'm just trying to get an idea of the grade levels in the room. Is anybody here a parent of a freshman? Sophomore? Junior? Seniors? Okay, so we got everybody. Okay. That's okay, we can totally do that. But the first couple slides, it's just to you wouldn't be here if you weren't part of this 92% of families see college as an investment in their child's future, right? It's great that it's an investment, but that, again, the difficulty comes into the planning part of it, right? Has anybody started thinking about researching direct schools? I just want to try to get an idea. Has anybody started to talk to financial aid offices and institutions, colleges at this point? Okay.
Have you started visiting schools?
So admission, like tours and kind of getting on the academic side, making sure it's a good fit for the student, and now we're tackling the financial. Okay. I'm going to skip through some of these. I put this slide in here. Sometimes it's nice to know, how do families pay for education? So every year Sallie Mae does a study. It's a study that goes out to families to base, essentially, how do American families pay for college, right? And this pie chart really just shows you there's a lot of different resources. Most of it is coming from income and savings, and that's parent and student. But the second biggest chunk is scholarships, right? Free money, and we're going to talk about that. How do you find it? Borrowing is also a piece of the pie, as well as this tiny sliver of friends and family, but they do make up 2%, right? So we're going to talk about what resources encompass this kind of pie. So again, very high level. Is anybody familiar, when you see the word FAFSA, that second bullet, is anybody familiar with that acronym? It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. That is your #1 application for all things financial aid, federal, state, and institutional. And we're going to touch on that.
And the key word is free. So anybody that is asking you to pay in order to help you file the FAFSA, say no thank you. There's a lot of resources for you to available, including the offices where your student is planning to attend, counseling in high schools, and even when you do the FAFSA, they have a live chat version that somebody could come online and answer your questions if you're stuck in a question. So don't ever pay to get the FAFSA done.
Yeah, and I'm glad Evelyn said that. For many years, there have been companies, and they do shut them down pretty quickly, but sometimes if you type in, FAFSA.com or FAFSA. You can get to a site that isn't really the free application. It's somebody's utilizing that domain and asking you to pay. So just remember, don't pay to file these forms. And then we'll talk about how to read a financial aid award offer. So when you receive an offer from the school, what does it look like? What are the different types of financial aid that I'm actually applying for? And then we'll walk through federal loan options, and then what to do after all that financial aid is applied and I still owe money, right? That's the big question mark. So we'll walk through some of those options. I'm actually gonna skip through this. Sometimes this is a little bit of a surprising slide. So this is actually based, the College Board, so the company that runs the PSAT, the SAT, they do a study every year and they actually trend college pricing, right? So trends in college pricing comes out every year, and you'll actually see the averages. And now again, these are the average cost of a 2-year degree. You can see just over the $12,000. This is annual cost. Your top right is your in-state 4-year public. Bottom right is your out-of-state 4-year public institution, and then your private institution on the bottom left. And we're going to talk a little bit about what makes up this cost and why I want you to not get too hung up on the sticker price at an institution. Especially having come from and worked at private education, in private higher ed, it does come with a higher sticker price. But then we're going to talk about ways that that school will work with you to cut that down. So generally there's 2 types of costs. I don't like the font. Can you read the font on this slide?
No.
I'm glad to get the feedback because I actually don't like the font, I realized. So at the very top, so you have direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs are billed costs by the school. So that's your tuition and fees. And if your student is living on campus, it's room and board. Now you'll see in the indirect costs at the bottom, on the very, very bottom has the same housing and meal plans. The reason it's listed in both places, certainly your student doesn't have to live on campus, right? If they choose to commute or they live in an off-campus apartment, they still can receive financial aid to help them cover the cost of housing and food, right? So even if you're not paying it to the school, you still are incurring a cost. But again, your books and supplies, transportation, maybe to and from school or home for breaks. They want to live too, right? Personal expenses, shampoo, soap, pizza, right? So all of these costs, when you saw those averages before, it includes all your total cost of education. So it's more than just your tuition bill, okay?
Is that clear?
Yeah. Mr. Evelyn didn't want to, you want to attempt it?
No.
Well, let's see if this works. We're going to see what happens. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we'll be able to do it. Can you hear it?
There are many things that appear to college tuition bill aside, tuition. And those numbers don't even include the other stuff you need for college, like computers, notebooks, even extra marksheets. So how do you figure out how much college really costs? We don't need any top secret equation. You just need to know one phrase. Cost of attendance. Cost of attendance, or COA in short, is the college's estimate.
Can you raise your hand if you could hear it?
Cover one year college. Includes building expenses, classes, plus out-of-pocket costs like books and living expenses.
So, this cost of attendance excludes tuition? It includes real food, right? Not just pizza?
Cost of attendance includes both tuition and meal plans, plus housing, clothes, fees, and a bunch of stuff you may not have thought of. Every college and university has a different cost of attendance.
We don't have to.
Most list their cost of attendance on their website.
Is it a link you can
It's
send
what?
us later?
Yeah, and actually, so this is a, this is a resource. So this comes from a website.
Think about this,
Oh,
think about your
stop that.
tuition, that your
Let's just go back in here.
Also too, we're gonna share, we're gonna get the video,
Right.
the
And then
slide,
you can-
and we're gonna
you
get the
can click
video
on it.
anyway, and I'll make sure that it gets put up either somewhere on our school website, or I can get your emails and send it out to you.
Yeah.
That way then you can
Because we're
watch it.
taping it.
Yeah, because this is just a free, it's called payingforcollegeresource.com. There's actually a video series within here, so things like the financial aid offer, scholarships, cost, of attendance, these are actually pulled directly from that site. They're just 3-minute clips. You know, we all learn a little differently, right? So there's tip sheets, there's videos, there's blogs. It's just free tools, but we'll make sure that you can get them.
Yep. And basically what the video was saying is, a lot of you are expected to hear a budget. For in the financial aid world, it's cost of attendance. And the reason why it's called cost of attendance is because we have to do a budget in order to determine how much to give you. So the cost of attendance is, like Carrie explained before, is the budget for you for the year, but that includes indirect costs that are things that you are going to provide to your individual student that we're not going to bill you for it. So you're going to see a lot while you're applying for colleges, cost of attendance, and let's say to make it a round number is $60,000, right? But it might only really cost $38 to come to the school. So when you are looking for resources on how to cover, you might need to come up with the 38 because that's the bill that you're going to receive. But there's other things that you could pay out of your pocket little by little, like transportation. You don't need to put $1,000 for transportation if that's what we estimated it will be, because they'll be going for the year. You don't pay for gas all at once. So that's the difference between what a cost of attendance is. So don't get scared by the sticker price, because there's a component there that you could manage without having to pay the school.
Whenever you see the number, it's the whole.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. They will provide, so that number is important because it's the maximum amount of financial aid that you can also receive. So on here, and again, it's lined up very weird, but on here, so your net price, so which is what Evelyn was actually just saying, right? So you have your total cost of attendance for the year, tuition fees, room and board, and then those indirect fees, right? Transportation, books and supplies. That all gets added together to get the top number. And what you actually can do, and we'll talk about that second line says your family's EFC, which is considered, is it estimated or expected? Expected family contribution, which we'll talk about what that is in a minute. And then you subtract any free money, right, that the student is receiving, grants, scholarships, because that's not repaid, to get your total out-of-pocket net price.
And all schools are required to have it as part of their website. If you type net price calculator, they'll give you an estimation of, based on the student's SAT and your household size, how much they're expected. Unfortunately, a lot of schools do it based on information that we get from the government, so it's always a year behind. So it's gonna be more or less 6% accurate, because it's a year behind for every school.
Yeah, and actually in here, when you get this, there's also a federal website that will link you, so is it collegecost.ed.gov still, right? Again, we'll get you this too, and then you can actually start typing in different schools and looking for their net price calculator. Or like Evelyn said, every school has one on their website to help you understand, okay, the sticker is this, but this is an estimate of what the net price, especially for those of you that are freshmen, sophomores, juniors that can't apply yet for actual financial aid. Once you are able to apply, you have a better idea of your individual net cost, right? So you'll start receiving information from your school's financial aid office. But to help you plan for that, you can start looking at those net price calculators now, just to, to kind of play around. To Evelyn's point, it may be a year behind, so it could be off a little bit, but it's your best estimate. I'm not going to read this slide to you. I just want to say there's a bullet on here. I think it's in the third one. Not assume, and I know I've said it 100 times, and I'm not even telling you you should go to a private school specifically. The reason that I don't want you to assume that a private institution is always going to be more expensive than another is because I eliminated first generation student, single parent. I didn't even consider a private education because I didn't understand it. I went to Kutztown, I had a great experience, and I'm very happy with my decision, but I didn't even consider private university because of that sticker price. So really, we're just here to kind of level set how those institutions can align their cost, so that when cost becomes a factor, and it is for many of us, you're also, some of those other pieces are filtering to the top, like the academic experience, like the fit right? The student feels that they fit at that institution. So this, you wanna talk about the FAFSA?
Yeah. So the FAFSA is, like we said before, it's a free application for federal student aid. Even if you think you're not gonna qualify for anything by applying for the FAFSA, we suggest you do. One reason is you don't know if your circumstances will change, and now you have access to funding that you may not have had you not done the FAFSA. The second reason is if private colleges utilize the FAFSA, and we have our own private money that we use the FAFSA to award you extra funding. So even if you think you're not gonna be eligible for anything because your income is X, apply, because if we offer you aid that you don't want, let's say it's just a loan and you don't want it, you could decline it, you don't have to use it. But at least you know what is available to you. In order to do the FAFSA, you're gonna need what is called an FSA ID. And with that FSA, and they have these at the table, so if you wanna grab them. The FSA ID is your electronic signature to sign the FAFSA and to sign any federal loans if that's a way that you're gonna go. The student needs their own FSA ID. At least one of the parents need an FSA ID. When you're doing it for the parents, if you are filling it out for your student, make sure they're involved, because then year 2, 3 they get to us, or they're graduating and they need to do extra counseling, and they have no idea about the security questions that you set up, because you set it up for them. So while you're doing it, empower your student and do it with them.
Is the application for parents? Or
It's for
students?
it's for the student. So the student starts it. Most of the application is demographic information, name, address, date of birth. Then it goes into finances. You could do, to do the FAFSA, you could do it the October 1st of the year prior to the senior year ending. So if your student is starting school in September or August of 2020, you could have done your FAFSA already as of October 1st of 2019. The income information that is required for the FAFSA is 2 years prior. So everybody filing the FAFSA for the 2020 academic year is actually using their taxes for 2018. It used to be that you filed the FAFSA when you did your taxes. The government move away from that, so now it's 2 years ahead. So at any time, senior year, come October 1st, you could do the FAFSA. And then there's a link there that you could say that you want to get the information directly from the IRS. We recommend that you do the IRS retrieval tool. The reason for that is the chances of you being selected to be verified is minimum. You cover verification right now?
I don't, no, you can, okay.
So verification is the government selects 30% of the population for the financial aid offices to make sure that the information you put on the FAFSA is accurate. There's some things that you do that could get you selected. It's supposed to be random. But for example, if the income doesn't match up with the taxes paid and things of that nature, they might trigger you to get selected. So if you click to get it directly from the IRS, you eliminate some of those triggers. So if you could do the data retrieval, we recommend you do. There's people that are not able to do the IRS retrieval tool. If you amended your taxes, it might not allow you to do it. So if you could do it, do it. If you can't, there's ways for you to provide the information, and but it's not complicated. It looks intimidating, but it isn't. And like I said before, if you ever have a question because you're stuck on a question, there's a button that you could click and somebody will come online and help you. Or you could stop the application, save it at that point, and call one of the financial aid officers, and we'll help you through the process.
So senior parents really should have done this by now. If they haven't, they should.
Yes.
Get in line quick.
Yes, do it.
Correct.
It is, so, especially in Pennsylvania, so in order to be considered for the state grant, it's still May 1st
Yes.
deadline. Don't wait until May 1st, okay? Because your colleges that have their own financial aid that they can provide, they may be utilizing it on a first come, first served basis. So the sooner that you get that FAFSA filed, You can list a number of schools, you don't have to know what school you're going to, 10 schools?
Up to 10 schools.
Yeah. You list up to 10 schools, all 10 of those schools will receive your information. Once that student is accepted for admittance to be a student there, you will receive a financial aid offer from the school. And we'll talk about that. But so don't get too hung up, oh my gosh, I don't know where my student's gonna go, I'm gonna wait. Fill it out. There is actually a document on the table as well that breaks down the grade levels and what year and when you can start, you know, just to make it a little bit easier and like, wait, when can I start? It got confusing when they bumped it out, but it gives you more time. The idea is, the sooner you get it, you'll have more, you have more time to decide, how am I going to make this work, right?
If your student is going to, and you're applying for out-of-state and in-state schools, make sure that the first school you list on the FAFSA is a Pennsylvania school. The reason for that is only the top school gets information for the state grant. So in order for the state grant to consider you, your first school has to be a Pennsylvania school. Yes?
Well, that one I wish I knew beforehand. Just two experiences from that. So yes, I did fill it out, and quite frankly, I did it 12 years ago to my daughter, and I was really dreading the fact of having to do it. It was so easy. It was very easy. It was, and the button to hit for the IRS thing was very easy. You didn't have to do anything else after that. The 10 schools, if, like my son, he says, oh, after you do the 10, he finds another couple of schools he wants to apply to. It's very easy. You can just go in, delete one school and add a new school, so you can do more than that.
That's great feedback. And the IRS data retrieval is probably even though it will reduce your chances of being verified, it's your most likely, most accurate pool of information, right? When we do our taxes, it is a simple form, but it's easy sometimes to look at a line. It says, look at line number 42, and maybe you looked, it's tiny. You looked at line 43 and you put that on your FAFSA. This actually just ensures the data pulls over accurately, and it's great to know that it was simple, the click of a button, and you have most of it filled out. So it is actually an application for both of you, right? It's for the student, it's the student's application, but for a dependent student, it includes parental information too. So it is really your one-stop shop. There are institutions, you have to check with your schools, they may require an additional form. Some schools that do offer their own financial aid may ask you to fill out an institutional form as well, but everyone requires the FAFSA. So just, if you get nothing out of this, right, FAFSA, do it as soon as possible to get access to the most money.
And the reason why you want to do it as soon as possible is, think of it of money as being in a cookie jar, right? You can only get cookies while there's cookies in the cookie jar. So for private institutions, we do have endowed money that we give out based on need, but we can only give you what we have. So the sooner you apply, you have the best chances of getting access to that money. Let's say your student is exceptional, and I'm going to use DeSales because that's where I work. And your student might qualify for a full tuition scholarship. There's only a certain number of full tuition scholarships that we give out. So the sooner we get information to you, the sooner you are in the pool. Because let's say they wait to May to apply, and at that time we get the information, and it's exceptional, but we don't have any more of those to give out. So the sooner you apply, the better. Because you want to make sure that you get your choices of all the cookies.
All the cookies.
Yeah.
Well, there's cookies up here, please.
I have a question about the student FSA ID. The student's gonna create that, prompted then as a parent to go get your own ID? Like, is that all part of the process?
You
Yeah,
could
you
do it
each-
together. You go to the website, he asks you for demographic information. He actually does a check with Homeland Security to make sure that your Social Security belongs to you. And then, but you create your own password for it, and then it tells you, it doesn't give you a password, you create your own password, and then that's what you use for the whole career. Yeah. So do it together. It shouldn't take you more than 15, 20 minutes. If that.
But that information is the student information.
Both. For the FAFSA, it's both. For the
Including
FSA ID.
the SOCH.
Correct.
Okay, okay.
For the FSA ID, the student does one and you do one. Look at it as when you created an email account, I think. You have your own, and your student have one for the FSA ID. The student does one, and you do one. And then together you do the FAFSA, and then you use the FSA ID that you created to sign, for the student signs with his FSA ID, and the parent will sign with the FSA ID.
So both of them can enter into the
Mhm.
account.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yep, absolutely.
Outside the school gives you scholarship
Mhm.
based on the EFC. You get this amount. You talked about an exceptional student. After that initial offer, is a lot of that based on income after that?
Correct. You wanna go to?
It's not really, it's not really about the student.
It
in
is.
most cases.
Okay. The EFC only comes into consideration for need-based money.
Right.
So for scholarship money, let's say you apply to whatever college and they're looking for you for scholarship money, they only look at the student's merit. So they'll look at SATs, they look at ranking, they'll look at GPA. And then that determines whatever the scholarship is from that institution. Then when the FAFSA comes into consideration is for need-based. And it's probably ahead, but I'm gonna go. The expected family contribution, although it states family contribution, is not really what you're expected to contribute. It's more of a number in the grid, right? So your need could go from 0 to 9999999. So when you put in the information for the FAFSA, the government computes, and they take into consideration how close to retirement you are.
Yeah, that's what, this will show them what.
How many people in the household. So it takes a lot into consideration on the background to come up with what they call the expected family contribution. That number that colleges use to see how much need you have. So if your expected family contribution is 9999999, and my cost is only 60,000, your need is gonna be 0. So in that case, we will look at you for grant money because you don't have any need. But we will still look at you for scholarship money because that's based on the student's merits. Is that clear?
So not additional scholarship money, just what you received in the award letter?
Well, the award letter will include both,
Okay.
if you qualify for both.
Yeah, and actually, I just want to point out on this slide, when everyone was talking about the EFC, on the left-hand side provides the information that they're looking for when they're calculating that number. And think of the EFC, I really wish they would change the name of it, because really it's just a number for, it allows the school to determine your financial aid eligibility. It should never be called estimated or expected family contribution because the chances of you only being expected to pay that amount is slim. So kind of forget what EFC even stands for. Just think of it as the calculation for financial aid. On the right-hand side are assets that are not included. So they do not include pension, they do not include home equity, right? But on the flip side, they also don't include bills, right? They don't include if I'm paying for K through 12 education, for instance, right? Those are not pieces that are included in that calculation.
They do include, your bills are included in what they call the income protection allowance. So what they do is they say, Pennsylvania residents, we estimate that this is how much it costs you to live here. So they give you a protection allowance based on that. But they won't go into, my mortgage is 3,000 and Carrie's is only 1,000.
Right.
They don't take that, they just do an average based on the state.
And they're also not looking at your retirement,
Like that.
right? So they're not looking at retirement as an asset that's protected, right? So I mean, or your home, right? I could have home equity, you could have home equity, maybe I don't. Like, that is not looked at from a financial need perspective. So just want to give you a heads up. You will be asked the age of the oldest parent.
Correct.
The reason that that is asked is because that will actually determine some of those allowances on what is actually protected, right? Like if you're getting closer to retirement, for instance, right? There's a certain percentage of your income that the government doesn't include in the calculation of what they feel you can afford to pay for school. So we'll just leave it at that. I'm not the federal government or did not determine the calculation. But once you get to the point where you fill out the FAFSA and you get that magic number, right, and you listed your 10 schools, you'll start receiving financial aid offers from each of those institutions. And I'm guessing that some of you have gotten some of those. Yes.
You commented about the first school on the FAFSA form.
For the Pennsylvania state grant.
Right, now what if you didn't do that?
You could go back and change it. You could go
You
back.
can change it, and then
And then the state will
recalculates
get
or
it.
whatever. Okay, cool.
Yep,
And now
anytime
what-
you make a change, it'll actually trigger that change record to any new institutions or
And
like
that's a
the
Pennsylvania
state.
school you're talking
Correct.
about. Just whether it's private or state,
Yep,
doesn't matter.
doesn't matter.
Okay.
2-year, 4-year, as long as it's a Pennsylvania school, the Pennsylvania state higher ed will get your information and then start sending you information about the state grant.
But that's all based on your EFC.
It is need-based, but they do have their own formula, but it is need-based.
All right.
So just to confirm what you said, and I'm glad he asked the question. If I had a state school number 3 now, I go back in, because you can make changes, like you said. All I have to do is go back in
And put a
this,
Pennsylvania school as your
reorder.
number one.
Yeah, you can just
And
flip them.
Interesting.
So then each school still gets your information,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
It's
they already
just-
got it, right?
Exactly.
Correct, but now, it'll link to the state grant.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Is there a limit of state schools you can list?
No.
Just 10.
What if all 10 are PA?
Oh, yeah,
At
that's
any
fine.
given time.
They all get
yes.
that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, the schools don't get it. The agency that does the state grant gets your information and sends you for you to apply, to do an application. Sometimes they see your income and they see that there's no point in you applying, so they will let you know, you don't qualify, so they won't ask for your information. But only the agency gets it, not all 10 schools.
Okay.
Right, the schools will receive your FAFSA information to calculate your financial aid offer, but they won't receive the state will, every school that you list on there will know that you're applying for financial aid at their school. And what will trigger that financial aid offer to get to you is once the student is accepted for enrollment at that school.
And once you're at that school, if, let's say you did 3 different Pennsylvania schools, but you chose to go to mine, right? But the state application went to school A, we will let you know, you didn't list us on the
Oh,
state
so
grant.
you change that
So then
again
they'll
to
change
them
it
as-
and
or-
it'll come to the
Okay.
school that you're attending.
Okay, so that's a living.
It'll get to you.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we will go through the
So
process.
once it's assigned to you, you always have it. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Mhm.
If you qualify for it, you qualify for it regardless of what school you go to.
Is the financial aid negotiable with the school?
Coming from a private institution, yes and no. The reason why I'm saying that, different financial aid officers do different things. If you go to a financial advisor, they'll tell you to appeal, because that's a new keyword, right, appeal. Some schools, we go out with the best offer, so we're gonna let you upfront know, this is how much we're able to give you, so you can make an informed decision. Some schools count on you saying, I need more, so, and they have a separate pool that they'll give you some more money. Even if you appeal for more money, nobody's gonna go offer you 10,000 more, right? The most you're gonna get is a couple $1,000. So, does it hurt to appeal? No. But be ready to hear no from those schools that went with their best offer.
When you say financial aid, question, are we talking about scholarship money?
Yes. Yes, what you're gonna get from the,
Or
I'm
you
trying
don't
not to
pay
go
that.
ahead of the slide.
No, you're
What
not.
you're gonna get from the
No.
federal government, is set by your EFC.
Right.
So whatever you're gonna get from the state grant is set by your EFC. So that you cannot appeal. What you can appeal your federal aid for is, let's say circumstances change. You're using income that you had 2 years ago. Let's say something changed, you lost your job, there was a death in the family. Something drastically changed, you could, contact the financial aid office that you're going to, let them know that your circumstances have changed, and in that case, what we do is, we project your income. So instead of using your 2018, we're gonna ask you for information about your 2020 to see how it's going, we're gonna put those numbers in for you, get a new EFC and see if that changes. But, those are only done on, mitigating circumstances. So if you work for a commission, let's say, right? We might tell you no, because if you work for a commission, it might be really good this year, right? 2018, and you're doing bad in 2020, but 2021 you might do good. So you don't want us to revisit you when you're making really good money.
And they take
So-
money away.
Right?
Their own
So,
money.
if it's for that reason, because you work on commission, we might say no, because that's the nature of your job. If it is that, you got laid off or something happened that changed dramatically, we will revisit and, project your income. Okay?
And you have to apply every college year, right?
Yes.
Correct.
And it gets easier after year one, right? It's a renewal, so some of your information is pre-filled on the FAFSA.
You already have your ID.
You have your ID, so, but yes, you do. You apply each year, because again, your tax information could change each year. Or maybe the student transfers, right? You know, so there could be, but you do reapply for financial aid for each student each year. So if you have more than one child in school at the same time, you're actually completing 2 applications, 2 FAFSAs, right? It's not one household application, it follows the student.
Okay, so, before we talk to you about cost of attendance, so that's your budget. When you do the FAFSA, they give you an expected family contribution. So financial aid offices, what we do is we take your cost of attendance, we, subtract your expected family contribution, that gives us what your need is. The reason why that's important is, from your EFC, we're gonna come up with the information of how much federal, grants are you gonna receive. One of them is Pell. You could get up to, $6,195 this year for Pell, for the whole year. That's based if you have a 0 EFC. If your EFC is in the 4,000s, you get a reduced amount. So that is, we get a chart from the government that says, based on this EFC, this is how much you pay. Pell is done based on whether you go full-time, 3/4 time, half-time, or less than half-time. So your financial aid, for the most part, when you get your first award letter, is gonna be as a full-time student. And what that means is 12 or more credits, okay? So when you get your award letter, you're gonna get your cost of attendance, EFC, your need. So we're gonna tell you all the grants that you could qualify from the federal government or the state. Then you're gonna get, if it's a private institution, any scholarship money that you're eligible to receive. And then, we're gonna look at you for need, and that's where we give you institutional grants. So let's say, you apply for DeSales, your cost of attendance is 60,000, your expected family contribution is 20. So now we're looking at you as a family with 40,000 in need to see how we could help you fill that gap. So when you get your award letter, you're gonna get your federal grants, your institutional grants and scholarships, and then we're gonna give you what is called, your loans. Loans.
I was gonna say, this,
Okay.
no, but I was just gonna point to it, wait, go ahead, I'll be Vanna.
Oh, thank you.
What are the loans?
You could get loans
Like
from
that.
different options.
And we
You
will
have-
dig into them.
Yes.
They're detailed.
So you could have guarantee loans, you could have private loans, you could have parent loans, and then, part of your award letter for most schools will include, work studies. And, most schools do not deduct the work studies out of your, cost. So when you're looking at the whole package, and you,
Yeah,
am I
that's
going
it.
ahead?
That's okay. No,
Uh,
I'll
when
just
you
say,
look
like
at-
Evelyn said, she makes it easier when we.
So when you look at the whole package, if you see work studies or institutional employment as part of the package, know that that is for personal expenses for the student, it won't be reduced. So remember how we said earlier to apply early, because you wanna have a lot of cookies? The sooner you apply, the better. Like your federal grants, if you qualify, you're gonna get the money regardless of when you apply. The reason why you wanna apply early is because you want to get access to that need-based money that institutions have, and for scholarship money. And for you to know, the sooner you know how much the cost is, the better. So let's say it costs $60,000 to go to University A, and you're getting 5,000 from the federal government and state. Now the 60,000 is only 55. Then you get the 25,000 scholarship that gets reduced from that. So the whole goal of the whole financial aid process is to get that 60,000 to a number that you could afford. Does that make sense?
And actually, Evelyn talked about, so this is just a sample of what a financial aid offer might look like. Just to confuse you a little bit more, these are not standardized. So that means it could look different for every school that you receive one from. The Department of Education has come out and given some guidance to essentially ask schools to kind of group financial aid this way. So you start out at the top, you would have a listing, your total cost of attendance would be listed on here, that number we keep talking about. And you can see that it's broken down. You see, and it shows you fall and spring. You receive an award that will calculate for the full academic year. Half in the fall, half in the spring. So you're doing this only one time per year, okay? And again, based on a full-time student. And then breaks down, so you can see in this example, it's a $50,000 annual cost of attendance institution. And then breaks down the free money, right? So you have your Dean Scholarship, which arguably could be a merit-based academic award, state grant, Pell Grant, another type of federal grant is listed here. And in this example, those grants total, and scholarships total $10,000. And that's where then you'll see that net cost, right? So you subtract the 10 from the 50, you get 40,000. I'm gonna skip work, because we are gonna talk about a little bit more, and Evelyn mentioned that. And then you have your federal student loan options. The FAFSA application, when you fill out that form, also provides an application for the student to receive federal student loans. Again, anything you see on a financial aid offer, you can accept or decline. Certainly, anything in this bucket, you would want to accept, right? That's free money not paid back.
So grants and scholarships, you never have to repay that.
Yes. So you take those, right? The work option allows the student to receive a job on campus and get paid for hours that they work. So if they don't ever work, they don't ever earn that money. That just allows them to earn up to $2,500 in this example with an on-campus, and there are off-campus opportunities as well, typically within community service. But allows the student to be paid through federal work-study money, and the reason it's considered financial aid is because it does not impact the student on their FAFSA in the future. Student earnings is part of that calculation, and your student's earnings are not protected like parental earnings, right? My kids are in high school, and if my son's working and he has, I don't know, he earned $4,000 last year, the federal government expects him to pay more of that $4,000 than my income. Does that make sense? So if they're earning it through a work-study program, it is essentially ignored. That's why it's considered financial aid, but it is not taken off of your bill. And sometimes it happens. The family will look at this and say, okay, I got $32,000 estimated remaining balance, but then they go to pay the bill and they actually owe $2,500 more, and it's because that's money the student will earn and get paid. Does that make sense? And then, again, you have your federal student loan options, and then you have lots of other ways to kind of fill that gap. And I use the word gap. I want to try to get away from it, because I don't know that it's just, the lingo that you kind of get in your head. So what is remaining? What balance remains? And that's where we're going to walk through some of those additional options. Yes?
Are the federal loans given or offered, regardless of EFC?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And we'll talk about, there's two types, and we'll talk about that. The type of federal loan, whether it's subsidized or not. Subsidy on a federal loan is a need-based offering that allows, basically the federal government is paying the interest on that loan while the student's in school. So there's no accrued interest over that time frame. An unsubsidized loan is like every other loan that we've ever used in our lives, right? Credit card earns interest, our mortgage earns interest, you know what I mean, or earns, costs us interest, right? So, and we'll talk about that. So there is a need-based component to the federal loan program, but each student is eligible
For the
for the
same
same
amount.
amount. It just depends if some of it will be interest-free or not.
And that's all based on the SC.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
Could you mention, like, what that amount is?
Yes. For a
Like,
first year.
you know, if you have
Oh, yeah.
30,000 versus 5,000, are you eligible for that? Like,
Oh,
what's
you
the
mean like,
threshold?
We'll let
That's
you,
hard.
it's hard
To
to
some
say.
degree.
We can, and the reason
Yeah, I know
why
what
we
you're saying,
cannot
I don't
give
know.
you, what that number is, your 35, let's say use 35,000 as your income. Your 35,000 income might be completely different than mine, because you might be older than me. You might have more people in your household than I do. So the actual formula to determine your expected family contribution is 8 pages long, to give you a point of reference. That's how many things they check. So it's really hard for any school to say, oh, if you make 100,000, this is more or less what you're gonna get, because there's too many factors that go into it that make that decision difficult. You had a question?
Yeah, if you have, like the last slide, if you got your financial aid package and it looked like that, and there's all 3 students gonna live there, and then they decide to commute, does that change the
Yes,
grants?
it could. It does.
So
So if your
you're gonna
student,
mostly apply as if they're gonna live there, and then you change your mind?
Correct. And, how it will change is, the original budget will change, because now the amount for, room and board will be different, because it will be living expenses. And we estimate that a student living at your house might not cost the student $50,000, right? So we come up with an estimate of what we think that is. The other reason that it might change is for a private school, remember where I said that they look, after your EFC, we look at you for need? We actually take into consideration, if some of the money coming to the institution because the student is staying in the residence halls, we might give you a little more money to subsidize that portion. Does that make sense?
And the FAFSA has a drop-down box that asks that question.
Correct, it says if the student is gonna live, on campus, if he's gonna live with the parents, off campus, I think those are the 3.
yeah, and off campus would just like be an apartment, right, not at their primary income.
You need to know, let them when you apply to schools, if you're gonna live.
I would err on the side of caution, let's say, I would apply as a resident student, that's where your best financial aid offer is, but remember,
Unless you know for a fact
Well,
that-
if you don't know, I would say resident. If you know for sure they're gonna be a commuter, it just complicates it, because now you have to get a revised financial aid offer. Just remember, you're reducing the cost, right, so that top number becomes lower, so it could impact everything else that fed
How much
into
you
it to
can
move
get.
that number. Hopefully not to the extent, so your net price actually is cheaper because you're living at home, because that would most likely be the reason to commute, right? So you don't now want it to be exactly the same. And we talked about a lot of this, I'm gonna skip through that.
For scholarships, particularly with private schools, the reason why I said, have you visited any colleges? We actually count how many visits you have had to the college, because we wanna gauge what your interest is on the school. You could get scholarships, if you go here at DeSales, because you're going to, you're paying Catholic tuition, we actually give you a scholarship that is guaranteed for the 4 years, just because you went there. So when you apply, for most colleges, when you do your admissions application, that's when you get reviewed for scholarship money. So at that time, nobody knows what your income is, so they're not looking at whether you have need or not. We're solely looking at the student. Another reason why we, recommend that you visit the schools that you're interested in going is, most likely you're gonna have an interview, right? So you might be competing with somebody else that have never visited, but your admissions counselor remembers, right, how charismatic you were or whatever. And they might say, well, but I remember Evelyn, I don't remember Carrie. Let's give that money to Evelyn, right? So that's why we recommend you visit. The second reason why we recommend you visit is you don't wanna apply blindly, go to, and then you hate it, right? Because you don't want your student to change second year. So when you apply for admissions, that's when they look at you for scholarships. Since we're telling you to apply early, let's say the student retakes their SATs and they get a higher grade, resubmit those grades because we'll reevaluate you to see if you qualify for more aid. If the colleges have, the other reason why you want to apply early is, for example, at DeSales, we have what we call scholarship days. And those are that you come and, let's say you say that you want to be a nursing student. You actually come on campus, you visit with the nursing faculty, and then those professors could recommend you. We really, really like this person, can we give them extra money? So regardless of what your SAT and grades are, if they like you, they might recommend you to get additional funding. But you have to be early in the process, because if you come in now and the scholarship days have passed, that's an opportunity you missed.
What dates are those, Jen?
For the most part, our last one is this Saturday, and that's for TV, so most of them have passed already. So my recommendation for those of you that are freshmen, sophomore, juniors, junior year, you already had to have had some contact with the schools. So the sooner you get into their mailing list, the sooner you know about events coming up, and they'll tailor it to your grade level. So that's how scholarship money, that's how, for the most part, you do the admissions, scholarship, and that's how they'll look for scholarship from the school.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
private
there's some other stuff.
scholarships.
I think we have another slide too, but go ahead.
There is a website that you can apply for outside resources. The church, where your student works, your own job. There's different scholarship engines that you could look for outside resources. Even if it's $500, that's $500 that you could use for books, that is not coming out of your pocket. The bad thing about scholarship resources is that you're thinking about it when you got the bill and you want to do it early. Because a lot of them, the deadline is like the February time frame. So the sooner you do it, the better.
Yeah, and I'll just mention what so Sallie Mae, and there's some other resources that are linked in here too. Sallie Mae it's a free scholarship search. I actually signed up, I have a freshman and a sophomore. I can also sign up as a parent and identify this is I'm a parent of a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior to help them look. The way that this is actually organized, you essentially fill out a profile, right? Provide information about you. Could be SAT, could be, maybe I play a certain sport, maybe I volunteer in my community, whatever you want to let these scholarship providers know about you, we can help match that student to scholarships that they're eligible for. I'm left-handed, I speak German, or you know what I mean, whatever it might be. There's a separate tab that actually provides your listing of scholarships that you appear to qualify for, and it ranks them by date of deadline. So to Evelyn's point, she'll actually tell you like, hey, this one's shutting down January 31st, and we'll put it at the top, right? Versus maybe something you have a little bit more time to complete. And I look at your counseling staff here, so we were chatting about scholarships. Usually, I did it. I stopped looking for scholarships after my senior year in high school. I actually got a scholarship from like I don't even know where it's from. I got a $500 check, and I was like, I have no idea when I applied for this, right? So every little bit helps. It takes some effort. Many times, it could be a video, it could be a poem. They're getting a little bit more savvy in how scholarships are submitted. It's not only essays. However, essay tends to still be probably that number one. We have some tips in here that you can share with your student, how to write an essay, how to stand out. Everybody looks at the Walmart scholarship or the ExxonMobil scholarship, and they're great, but think about how many people are applying for that versus maybe your local Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, your own employers, right? So this is just a great free resource. Sallie Mae does $1,000 a month. We just do $1,000 drawing all the way up through graduate school, so even if you're a grad student. And there are others, and we'll link you to those as well. So I would encourage you to encourage your students to keep looking for scholarships even when they're in college, because they exist. It's just most people stop looking because you get busy, right? You're busy writing essays for your classes. You're not thinking about the free money.
And for the most part, if you get an outside scholarship, unless it says that it has to go towards your tuition and your tuition is being covered completely, that's extra money. So we will never reduce any scholarship that we offer you already based on you getting outside scholarships. Because we understand that you put the extra effort to get those extra money, so we're not gonna penalize you because you obtain them.
And I would tell you to check with your school on their policy.
Because not
That's
every
the sales
school is the
policy,
same.
but I can tell you not every school is the same in the way that they handle outside scholarships.
And another question that, I would recommend that you ask those schools is that scholarship renewable? Reason, it's your first year, everybody's gonna try to get it, right? So they might.
Institutional scholarship you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay.
Your institutional scholarship. So, make sure if it's renewable, it's year 2, 3, and 4 gonna be covered by that same scholarship. Because what happened is I could get you on the door saying, I'm gonna give you 20,000 a year, right? And you are counting on 20,000 a year. Year 2, you apply, and all of a sudden I say, your EFC went up this much. We change your scholarship, so you're not getting that much. You don't wanna put yourself in that situation, so make sure you ask that question of the, financial aid officers, if it's renewable. If you get one of those scholarships that are tied to a major, right? You went to a scholarship day and you're a nursing student and we said we're gonna give you an additional 2,000 because you're a nursing student and we like you. But year 2, your student decides, I don't like nursing, I wanna be a psychologist. Does he follow the student if they change a major? So those are questions that you wanna ask ahead of time, so you know exactly what you're getting yourself into for the next 3 years. Does that make sense?
While we're talking about scholarships, we are just finishing up our junior interviews, so, your junior should have had a meeting with either Ms. Harris, Mrs. Honorado, or me, and we gave them a whole bunch of financial aid information. We gave them scholarship websites and how to pay for college booklets, so if your student, your junior, did not bring that home to you, tell them to get it out of their locker, dig it out of the bottom of their backpack, wherever they shoved it. But we gave everybody, that kind of scholarship information just as a starter, because there are lots of websites out there.
Oh, there's a lot.
And if you're a junior, you're a priest. For example, at DeSales, if an oblate recommends you, it's almost like a VIP, and all they have to do is, but it has to be done by December 1st, it's an automatic $20,000 in the 4 years. So you get 5,000 each year. If a priest that is an oblate of the, what is it, St. Francis de Sales, if it's an oblate from St. Francis de Sales and they recommend you, you get 5,000 each year. If it's an alumni from DeSales, if you know somebody that graduated from DeSales, by December 1st, they could recommend you. They can only recommend one student, so you might want to jump on that soon. By December 1st, they could recommend you. We give you $1,000 each year for 4 years. So talk to your friends, because you don't know who knows who, but you need to do it early. Okay?
So here's the second thing you'll take away, right? The FAFSA, and talk to the financial aid offices at your schools. Because that's how you find out about some of these, like we're hearing about some of the things DeSales does. Maybe you're looking at other, but really engage, certainly check their websites, of course, I'm sure they're putting things online too, but yeah, talk to your.
You commented about the sales accepts the tuition paid here.
What happens is we kind of give you like a credit. So, $5,000 a year.
$5,000.
Yeah.
So because you pay, tuition here, we automatically extend you a credit of 5,000 each year, so it's 20,000 a year.
Is that common?
I mean, 20,000 for 4 years, not
Your
20.
child's been here for 4 years.
Correct. So
Right,
it's for
for each
every
year
year that you pay tuition here, we give you 5,000.
Is that common?
I don't know, I can only speak on.
And most Catholic schools in Pennsylvania will have it, but not all of them.
It's different prices.
Yeah.
Do you know
Right,
which
like,
ones?
for example, like Villanova doesn't do it.
Yeah, Villanova doesn't do it.
Well, that's a great thing.
LaSalle doesn't do it
What's that?
Do you list of the colleges that give them
I don't have a
tuition
set
credit?
list, but I could come up with one, yeah, that's not.
Yeah, that'd be a bad.
We will put that in the next counseling newsletter.
That was,
Thank
that was
you.
something I, so every month in our counseling newsletter, you probably don't even know how well, but there's a link in the weekly, emails you get when we do our monthly newsletter. We feature a specific scholarship search every month, and the link goes right to that scholarship search. We also, on our school website, under the counseling page, have a list of resources. You can just click on the link, and it takes you to searches. And on Naviance, if you are using Naviance, your students are. You can also get an account if you don't have one. There is the Sallie Mae Scholarship Search on Naviance. So you put in the criteria, it gives you the list based on the criteria, and then we can look there.
So there's lots of avenues. Just how many of you get that, Viking News weekly on like a Sunday night? Are you guys all getting that?
But
Okay.
sometimes the links don't work, because I tried to register for here,
And the link.
and the link wasn't working.
Because that's, we're really trying to link our stuff to that weekly newsletter that you can click onto our counseling newsletter, just right through that as opposed to having to go to the website and do all that. So we're trying to do it like that. Thanks for that feedback.
You just registered today.
Yeah, no, I went in
Is it?
last week, and I went in yesterday, and it still was giving me, so I wasn't sure if it was on my end or if it was.
It might be a browser issue, so
Yeah.
because
Well,
sometimes we have
got a
that
bunch of
situation.
registrations today, so at some point it was working today, so I don't know.
Yeah, it could be, sometimes you have to try like Chrome versus
Yeah.
Internet Explorer and
The Internet
it's,
Explorer.
or whatever.
And last resort, just call us, like, we're happy to just forward it right to you.
I'm not rushing, I just wanted to, this is just, we talked about this basically, the federal student loans, there's the two types. You have your direct, so it's a direct loan, so in other words, the federal government is the lender, we use that in air quotes, right, of the federal student loan program. This is not something that you go to private banks to obtain, okay? So that financial aid award that offers the student information, the student direct loan, there's two kinds. So on the left-hand side is your direct subsidized loan, so that is need-based, so that is based on financial need. That's the opportunity for the student to receive funding in a loan that is interest-free while they're enrolled at least half time. That follows them through their entire career, right? So they could become a graduate student. Their loans would enter that subsidy period again, as long as they're enrolled at least half time, which is 6 credits. So that interest subsidy will actually benefit them. So interest will not accrue on that loan until they enter full repayment, which is 6 months after they either complete school or drop below 6 credits, okay? And then you have your unsubsidized version, which again is the version that is like every other loan, interest will accrue each month. You have the opportunity, on a federal student loan, the student is not required to make any payments on that loan while they're enrolled in school. Again, at least half time. That doesn't mean you can't make payments. That doesn't mean you won't save money if you make some payments along the way, especially if you have the loan that's on the right-hand side, the unsubsidized loan. Interest will accrue from the time that loan is sent to the school. So in theory, that very first loan, freshman year, that's 4 years of interest that's accrued in an account over here for 4 years. Once a student leaves school, after 6 months, all the money that accrued in this account gets added to the principal in this account, right? And then you start paying interest on a higher amount. So you will receive information from your federal loan servicers. You will know how much interest is being accrued on that loan. And so if the student's working, I do exit counseling interviews with students, and no student wants to hear me say, when you graduate, you receive cash reward for your hard work. A great place to put it is to pay that loan that's sitting in this account. Nobody wants to hear that. But the faster you can pay this money, right, the more that student will essentially save. But again, they are notified of this. It shouldn't be a surprise of what's sitting in that account.
Correct. And normally what I said to the parents is, on average, it's like $68 a year that he accrues. Buy one less sweater at Christmas and pay the interest. So then the student is not stuck paying interest on interest for 4 years.
I think I paid like $80 for a sweatshirt for one of my kids for
That's
Christmas.
for a full amount?
Well,
Correct.
we'll
The
talk
fir-
here.
The
This
first
is-
year,
Let me just show you this. So this will make actually more sense. So, go ahead, you can talk about it. But the borrowing limits, it's very limited in how much a student can receive.
and the reason why it's limited is because the government is guaranteeing, right? So they're not looking at credit, they don't care that the student is not working. They're saying, if you file the FAFSA, you're gonna get your first year 5,500. So, remember how I said at the beginning, if somebody asks you to pay to get any aid, it's not a good idea? There's a lot of companies that will say to you, if you give me $500, I guarantee you 5,500. Right? It sounds like a great deal. What they're saying they're gonna guarantee you is a loan, because as long as you do the FAFSA, you have access to 5,500 on the first year. The 5,500 the first year gets split, and this is where the EFC comes into effect. If you have need, 3,500 of that 55 is a subsidized loan. So the government will pay the interest for you while the student is in school until they graduate of 6 months. 2,000 is unsubsidized. Okay? If you do not have need, then you have 5,500 in the unsubsidized loan. And the best way for you to remember which one is what, the one with that U means you pay. Okay?
I like this, cookie jars. The one with the U is, they're gonna start stealing these, the actual interest rates are fixed on a federal student loan. They're set every July 1st. So for students that are entering school in the fall, you'll know the interest rate from July 1st, but we provided the interest rate right now, you can see on the right-hand side. There is also a fee that is attached to federal loans. It's just over 1%. Don't get too worried about this chart. The government basically changes the fee on October 1st instead of aligning it
Makes it
in
very
July.
tough for financial aid officers.
Well, so that's why you see two different numbers, but essentially it's just over 1%, and what that means is they will essentially keep 1% of the loan before they send it to the school. But again, you're still responsible, right, for paying that back. I mean, that's part of your total loan. So when Evelyn said roughly $68, that's really based, if you're borrowing $5,500 for the year at a 4.53% annual interest rate, you're calculating roughly $70 a year in interest. So yeah, if you can afford the interest, you can save yourself.
It's actually more like 6.5%, 7%, right?
If you add the rebate fee, yes.
Right.
Well, yeah, yes.
And do you think that's a reasonable percentage for a loan? Like, is it worth it to take those, or should you look at?
And you're talking to a person who works for Sallie Mae, right? So we do offer federal, we don't offer federal loans. We offer private loans. But I will tell you, if you are eligible for a federal student loan, it is in your best interest. If you're going to borrow, if you don't need to borrow, don't borrow anything, right? But if you need to borrow, you're going to rely on any borrowed loans, the federal student loan is your best option. It is the most flexible option. There are how many repayment options? I mean, frankly, it's actually maybe a little bit too many repayment options, because it gets confusing, but no other loan will be as flexible as this loan is for your student. And it's
Particularly
also
because
not
it's
based on,
guaranteed.
yes, it's not
Right, so
based
it's not
on
based on
credit.
credit at all.
Most 18-year-old students don't have any credit established, they just haven't had time yet. So if they were walking into a bank or coming to Sallie Mae, right, it would be difficult to receive, in any of the examples, if maybe I still have unpaid, need of roughly, let's say $10,000. After everything is applied, I have a bill of $10,000, now what am I going to do, right? And that's what we'll talk about next, but I would absolutely tell you, if you need funding, the federal student loan, I would absolutely, it's also the federal government also offers some, loan forgiveness opportunities depending on the route that your child may want to take in the future, public service, for instance. So you don't get those kinds of flexibilities with a general private loan, and I even represent one of those companies, right? It's a completely different program, so I would definitely.
Particularly if you qualify for the subsidized,
Yes.
because you're not gonna find any other place where you could borrow 35 the first year, that you don't have to pay until 4 years later when the student graduates.
Right, with no interest.
Right, so if you pay it that last year, then you have an interest-free loan for all that time.
Right.
You had a question?
Yeah, when you do that loan, federal loan, should the student's name be on that loan?
It is on the student name.
Yeah, this particular
For
loan
this
is a
particular.
student loan.
But
Mhm.
how about other loans?
Other loans.
We're going there.
Yeah,
Oh,
we're,
okay.
I think that's actually, look it,
Oh.
you fed me right in, yes.
For the first
Oh.
year is 5,500,
Oh,
the
sorry.
second year is 6,500, year 4 and, 3 and 4, it goes up to, the 10,000.
So the rest of the money comes from the next page.
Correct.
And for years 2, 3, and 4, how much of those are subsidized versus?
It's based on need again. They guarantee you the amount, but if you have need, it will be instead of 35 guarantee, it will be 45 and then 55.
Oh, and actually, when I was talking about repayment flexibility, I failed to mention, terms can be up to 25 years on a federal loan. Again, it could be anywhere from 10 up to 25. And again, we could certainly have an entire conversation about financing, right? And is a 25-year term in your best interest? Or when might that be something that, you know, is better for you? But again, it offers flexibility to help that student be successful in repayment.
The other thing that I wanna bring in with students,
Oh.
with the students, guarantee loans, you will be, the seniors in this class will be the first group that will have to go through, the government is adding a form. It used to be that in order to qualify for them, you did the FAFSA, and then you did what it was called an entrance counseling, which is a tutorial that lets you know your rights and responsibilities as a borrower, and then you did the actual application for the loan, which is the master promissory note. The master promissory note is good for 10 years. So the student does it the first year, as long as they want their loans, they could get it, and they use the same application. This year, the government implemented, what is called a borrowing information tool. And what it is everybody is, before we're able to give you the first disbursement on that loan, you're gonna have to go and do this tutorial. If you're a first year student, it's gonna take you to that college score card that gives you information on the college. The second year is gonna obligate you to look at how much you borrowed the year before. So every year, before we are able to pay on that loan, we have to make sure that you go in and see how much you owe.
And in reality, if it's a student loan, the student should be going in and doing it.
Correct.
Because ultimately, even if a parent says, I'm going to pay the student loan off for my student when they graduate, if in the event that doesn't happen, the student really is the primary borrower. And so should just simply be aware, right? That they are the one doing the entrance counseling. They are the one, you know, signing on the dotted line that, yes, I want, you know, this money.
It gives an investment in the process.
Yes. Yes. Oh, my kids are going to be taking their federal student. There is some skin in the game, right? That I'm putting some investment into this, and that they understand what it is, right? Because nobody wants a student to get into that final year and they come to financial aid and they're exiting.
And they do.
And they say, I had no idea that I borrowed. I thought everything I got was grant money.
Because the same way that they do an entrance counseling at the beginning that explains the rights and responsibilities, at the end, when they're ready to graduate, they have to do an exit counseling. And the exit counseling actually, at least how we do it, the student is at a computer, they see exactly how much they owe and how much are they expected to start paying. And oftentimes, I get a lot of crying because my parents were paying for this, I did not know I was taking this loan on the loan. So, it's good for them to know what they're doing, and you wanna, empower the student to know that this is coming in the future. Because maybe when they're getting refund checks from the institution, remember, if you borrow more than you need, you could get that credit back. The student will think about, maybe I don't want that refund, and I'll put it back towards the loan. Maybe when they're graduating and they see grandma gave me a gift for this much, maybe they'll think, oh, let me pay this. So, you want to have them as educated as possible.
And so the next couple slides just give you very high level the other types of funding. So we really kind of focus more on the loan funding, but before we get into that, every institution also offers a tuition payment plan. And so sometimes they contract with third parties to run their payment plan, they may do it themselves. So again, while we're gonna talk about the loan side, the education loan side of the house, just know payment plans exist. So if you know I can afford X, whatever X is every month for a period of 10 months, take that in a payment plan. Because it will save you that much from
Interest.
borrowed money,
Interest.
right?
And you could do a combination of everything.
Yes, it's not all or nothing. You don't have to take your balance and divide it by 10, because that might be an overwhelming number. But maybe I can pay $200 a month, and now I just saved myself 2,000, on that loan.
At which point you use your, college saving money?
Take that off the top like a 529 plan, or you just have it, savings set aside for college. Absolutely. Anything that you could pay out of pocket, obviously. Depending on, really depends on how you want to manage. If I had, I don't know, $20,000, do I want to pay $5,000 each year? Do I want to just pay all $20,000 up front and then I'll finance the other years? There's different strategies certainly if you have, funding set aside, or a 529 to kind of help cut that cost, but absolutely would fill in before you ever looked at any of these.
What's your advice on
It's
that?
so much of a personal decision for us.
It is.
sometimes.
Yeah, I would.
But,
yeah.
one thing that I would say, depending on the amount,
Mm-hmm.
if let's say I was gonna pay it all up front, I might do the payment plan. The reason for that is, I'd rather get the interest on the money than give it to the school up front, right? Cause if you're gonna give it to me in 10 months, you're collecting a little interest on all those 10 months, so I would do the payment plan. If it's a minimal amount, I might think of, I don't want the headache and put it all up front. So that's why it's a personal decision. And then the other thing that I would consider is, am I potentially getting more interest on the safe money than if the student does the loans, right? Because in that case, you might want to keep the money for the 4 years, collect interest on the 4 years, and when the student graduates with the subsidized or whatever loan, pay it off.
Pay it off, okay.
So
Yeah, there's a
that's
lot
why
of,
you have to.
Okay.
there's a lot of things to think about, and to Evelyn's point, the first year, the first loan that a student will borrow, whether it's student or parent, tends to be your most expensive loan if you're not paying on it until after they graduate, right? Because again, interest has accrued from day one all the way through year 4.5, because there is typically a 6-month grace period. So again, it's a tough question. This is the disclaimer of I'm not a financial advisor.
Yes.
Comes in, right, to provide that kind of advice, but it's something that's definitely to look into. So again, and all the free money, financial aid has been applied, the federal student
guaranteed
loan, all the
money.
guaranteed money, and then you have that kind of remaining, now what do I do, right? And I've already considered payment plans, income and savings, then I have, again, I use that word gap, right, that kind of unmet balance. And so the federal government does offer loans to parents. So this is a loan from the Department of Education to help parents fund their undergraduate student. Now, that is a loan that is in the parent's name, and it can never be moved to the student. Okay, and I say that because oftentimes, and actually this became a question in my own family, right? My cousin said, no, I'm going to pay this, Dad, my uncle, and he didn't. There is no way to take a parent loan and make it a student loan. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't make those arrangements with your children, but just understand this is a loan in the parent's name that will always be tied to that parent for the life of that loan. There are options to start paying while the student's in school, as well as options to defer that payment until they're finished. And then up here, you can actually see there are fees also attached to the parent loan. They're not listed. They're 4 point.
It changes every year.
I know.
But, the plus loan has a fixed interest rate.
Yep.
They come up with it every July 1st too.
It's
So for this year,
7.08.
7.0, right? So 0.8. And, there's a fee of 4.26, I think it is this year. It changed in October 1st, but I can keep it in. So it's the 7 plus 4. So it's a guaranteed loan, but now it's close to 11. If you have exceptional credit, you might want to look at the next set of loans that we're going to discuss. It used to be in the past the federal plus loan was your best option because it had a lot of benefits attached to it. Financially now, and with the competitors, you might want to look at your options because it's becoming a more expensive loan. It is also, if your credit is not that good, it might be the option that you could go with, only because with the, federal plus loan, they don't do things like income to debt ratio. And they only look at your credit for the last 180 days. So as long as you didn't have any bad credits within the last 180 days, most likely you're gonna get approved for the plus loan, okay? The other reason that you might wanna consider applying for a plus loan, let's say your credit is not good, and you know you're gonna get denied, right? If the government denies you for the plus loan, then your student becomes eligible for additional of the guarantee money. So if the plus loan gets denied, for loan purposes, your student become an independent student, and, they'll give you the first year $4,000 in unsubsidized loan, just because you got denied. So keep that in the back of your head in case, you know, for whatever reason, your credit is not that good, and, that there's additional resources for the student when it comes to that.
We will leave you with these slides, you can read these bullets, but it is a standard 10-year repayment term. Again, not underwritten in the same way that we understand, you know, if I went for an auto loan or, you know, so it's just that looking at a very short window of credit. So income, ability to pay is not a piece to this particular loan, which also lends to the same interest rate, right, for everybody with a fee, right? So you're not actually leveraging. If you have good credit, to Evelyn's point, you might want to shop to see what other options you might be eligible for.
And the other thing, remember how I said that the government for this incoming class implemented that you have to go in and see how much you owe? The same thing for the parents. So the first time before we disperse any money to you, you have to go in to see how much you owe to the federal government.
And then acknowledge that each year as you borrow. Which is certainly not bad, right, to understand what you already have before you borrow more. There are private education loans for parents as well. And so I should say parents with air quotes. So, and this slide does not represent any individual product. This just gives you some general guidelines. So you would want to check with your providers, and we can show you kind of how to find. Certainly Sallie Mae offers, but you have other providers in this space, Wells Fargo, PNC Bank, you know, there are a number of, who you may bank with. But essentially a private loan for I'm gonna say it this way, I'm not gonna use the word parents. Many of these programs are built for any credit-worthy borrower who wants to borrow on behalf of the student. In other words, on the federal side, it has to be a parent. It cannot be a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, sibling, spouse, etc. On the private education loan world, this option could be for a parent, but it could be for any other credit-worthy adult, right, 18 or older, that wants to borrow on behalf of the student. And much like the PLUS loan, this is still a loan in that person's name, the student is not tied to this loan. It's to benefit them for their education, but they're not on the hook, so to speak, on the repayment. Does that make sense? So it's not gonna hit that student's credit at all. This is another opportunity. Again, repayment rates, they vary, 5 to 25 years. It really depends on the lender. There are a lot of different options. Immediate repayment, interest-only payment, right, to make it flexible for that individual. And again, we can talk if you have questions specifically about these. There's a bullet at the bottom of this slide as well as the next one that says school certification. Essentially all that means is the school receives, when you fill out any private loan application, if that's, or PLUS loan, right, you're indicating the school that the student is attending. We being any provider, would communicate to your institution to say, hey, Joe Smith has this loan that's approved. They certify, yes, Joe Smith is a student here. We want half of the money to come in the fall, half of the money to come in the spring, so you only need to apply for any of this funding one time each year.
And we recommend you do it for the year.
Yeah.
So whatever your full bill is, double it, because circumstances change. And let's say you got approved, you have great credit this year, and you got approved. You don't wanna think about come January how you're gonna pay for spring. So take care of it at the beginning of the year. You don't have to think about it. You're not gonna accrue interest because interest only starts accruing when they give the school the money. So
they pay it out fall
We
and
would,
spring,
correct.
even though
correct, yeah, you would apply for 1 year at a time. The school would say, yep, I want, let's say it's a $10,000 loan, I want $5,000 in the fall on August 28th, and that's when the $5,000 would start accruing interest, and hold the other $5,000 until January 13th, and then that's when that will approve. So there's no, and then you're only having one credit check, right? So just from a credit perspective, it's not hitting your credit more than one time during the year. And frankly, nobody really wants to think about how am I paying this bill at Christmas time, right? Well, my bill comes in December, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have to apply for another loan, right? It's kind of, it'll show on your bill as an estimate. They know it's coming, they'll set it up. Don't get too worried about the dollar amount. If you need less money, you can reduce it. If you need more money, you can adjust it, right? So don't get too worried about that. Use the guideline Evelyn said, assume your bill is exactly the same one semester to the next. Typically, it will be.
And for most loans, within minutes, you know the result. Within 24 to 48 hours, the school will know. On average, within a week, we process the loan for you. So it's a lot
It
of,
is seamless.
a lot of parents, the first year, get very nervous and they wanna know. For some of the loans, there's a credit window. So if you apply too early, you might have to reapply. So that's why we say, if you wait for your bill, you will know exactly how much you will need and apply for that amount. And you have enough time to figure it out at that time.
And it is important, as I mentioned, credit, if you're shopping, right, much like so FICO takes into consideration how many times your credit is hit, right? A hard inquiry can drop your FICO score. So if I went to the mall right now and I opened up 3 credit cards all in one day, my credit score may go down, right? Because I'm opening up a lot of credit, or I'm applying for credit. Within the student loan space, if you are shopping and you're doing so within a 30-day window, so again, in Evelyn's example, if you wait for the bill, you're probably doing your shopping within those next few weeks. As long as you're shopping in that 30-day window, it will only hit your credit as one hard inquiry. Auto loans work this way, mortgages work this way, and student loans work this way. So there's an encouragement to shop, right? So just to be a good consumer, you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, I just applied for 4 different loans because I don't know which one I want yet. It did not hit your credit 4 times. Does that make sense?
In a lot of schools, particularly some private schools, we do some of the homework for you. So we ask for information, we see who offers the best interest rate, who has a designated customer service to us, who has been in the business long enough that will be there to provide you funds the senior year, because we want you to borrow from the same person. That'll be the objective, so you only have to pay back one payment. So we create a list for you, and then we tell you what that website is, and you could go and compare. And you could actually click and compare 3 lenders at the same time and say, this is the range of their interest, and go from it. And every lender is required to provide you a disclosure, so there's no surprises.
And those are standard. So every lender will provide you, it looks exactly the same. So it makes it a little bit easier to digest those disclosures. And then again, there's also private education loans. These are by far the most popular private education loan, is the loan in the student's name as the primary borrower, typically with a cosigner. And I say typically simply because a cosigner may help the student qualify for funding. So in the example earlier when we said most 18-year-olds just don't have enough time, they have just started building credit, they may not, these are credit-based programs. And so a credit-worthy cosigner typically is attached to these loans, particularly for your younger undergraduate student. Unless your student has credit built, they can apply without a cosigner. The only time in which a cosigner is required for application is if they're under the age of 18 in Pennsylvania. So for instance, I have an October birthday, right? So when I entered college, I was 17. If I used a private loan, I was required by law to have a cosigner because I wasn't old enough, right, to take a loan. Again, lots of different options. There are immediate repayment options. There are interest-only options. There's full deferment options. I mean, there's flexibility in how you want to manage that kind of in-school.
Well, what type of loans are those?
These are private education loans. So a loan from Sallie Mae, a loan from PSECU, a loan from M&T Bank or Citizens Bank, or an actual lender.
So they're not required to take the government loan before this?
No, you're not required, but it's recommended.
Yeah, even I would recommend it as a private education provider.
Plus this.
Yeah, yeah. And I will point out,
Not the parent loan, the guarantee ones.
The guaranteed student.
And remember how we said that the plus loan is a fixed rate of 7%? The private lenders have different products. So you could decide to do a private loan with a fixed rate, because they're taking a higher risk on you, because they're guaranteeing that interest rate for the life of the loan. It might be a little higher, but you also have variable interest rate. So if I had exceptional credit, I would look for, and I know that I'm paying that loan within a few years, I might go for the variable rate only because it will offer me the lowest interest rate for that loan. So that's why it's a very personal decision, and that's why you know your credit, you know your finances, so you have to make that decision. Yes?
You just said you mean us as the parent with the credit?
Yes. For some of, because the student may not have credit, your credit, you're co-signing the loan if it's the parent.
It's your co-sign.
So it will be your credit that determines what the interest rate will be.
Right.
Because there's no credit, they don't have bad credit, but they don't have good credit either. So they're basing it on that cosigner. A lot of the private lenders have cosigner release. And what that is after the student have established themselves and they're paid a certain number of payments on the loan, they could write in, their credit gets reevaluated, and they could release you from the loan. That's in the future, so that's a risk that you're taking as a cosigner of any loan, but know that that exists. And I would check if some of them, the student have to have graduated, right? So you need to look at everything that needs to happen in order to get that loan released.
Yeah, and I was gonna point out the co-signer release, so yeah.
It's a student loan,
Mhm.
that has to be paid immediately.
No,
Upon the
you could be-
given money.
No, so it depends, so you're typically provided options, right? So at the time that the loan is approved, and again, I'll just speak to Sallie Mae generically, but this, everybody might show you these options a little bit differently, but you're provided options. It says, congratulations, you're approved, you're applying for $10,000, here's your fixed interest rate, here's your variable rate, you can then at that point choose, here are your in-school repayment options. Maybe it's immediate repayment, and you check that box, or maybe it's full deferment, and you check that box. Yeah, you can, so it's up to you how you wanna manage it. There is no prepayment penalty with any provider that I'm aware of. Again, you wanna make sure, right? But the cosigner release that Evelyn talked about, I often say this to anyone who's considering being a cosigner. It is not something, no lender is going to say. So Sallie Mae's policy is after 12 monthly consecutive on-time payments of principal and interest. So the student has to graduate, so we do have a graduation requirement, so to complete their program, and make 12 monthly on-time payments. We will never say, congratulations, you've made 12 on-time payments, we're automatically going to release your co-signer, okay? We'll hold on to two people on that loan as long as we can, right? It reduces risk. However, keep it in the back of your mind, right? Certainly if I'm co-signing, I know in the back of my mind at some point, there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? I'm not attached to this for the life of the loan. And then at that point, you do have to, it is an actual request, right? The student requests, I'd like my co-signer to be released for my loan. There is a soft credit check that's typically done to make sure we're not setting the student up for failure, right? That they can handle that payment, and then the co-signer is removed from the loan. So check with your different providers, you know, to everyone's point, when you have those comparisons. If that's important to you, find out what their policies are. Most providers have them, not all do. So just something to keep in mind.
Disability and death.
Oh,
is
death and
another
disability, yeah.
That they could cancel your loan. So know if the student passed away for whatever reason, you don't necessarily have to continue to repay the loan.
Which is similar to the federal program. They have a similar, or disability as well. So the student is unable to work, check with your providers to see if they offer disability protection to then release the student and the parent, or whomever the co-signer might be, from the loan. Yes?
Do any of those loans, so, when the student graduates and they start work, and any of those options go to like a fixed loan based on their salary?
Oh, like an income-based repayment
Income-based
option?
repayment, is that something separate?
It's not standard in the private education space, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It is more of a, there is an income-based repayment option on the federal loans. They have, that's why I was saying on the federal student loan, that guaranteed student loan, there are so many repayment options, they're very flexible. Which is why I would say you always wanna maximize that if you're gonna borrow. On the private loan side, you really need to check with each individual provider on what they offer. Sallie Mae offers a graduated repayment period, but it's just for a year. Others may offer something a little bit different. So, not in the standard sense that it's tied to your income for the life of your repayment.
They answer my
At least that I
question
know of
They
on the
answer the
private.
question that it's more available if you do the federal piece.
Federal student.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I was
absolutely.
counsel, during my extra counseling, I told the students, the government is actually pushing the income-based repayment. I caution the students and I say, if you are in a job that you're not making enough, right, you don't wanna not pay the loan, so income repayment is great. If you could make that payment, I suggest you do. The reason why is, let's say, you qualify for the income-based repayment, in year 5, you have this great job, you just pay 5 years worth of income only on the loan, and you owe exactly the same thing that you owe the first day you graduate. So, I say that to say, you hear in the news all this, how much students owe. The government has a part of it because they are really, when you go to repay, they say, oh, I noticed that you qualify for income-based repayment. In the past, the standard repayment was 10 years. So they gave you 10 years interest, you pay principal and interest, 10 years you're done, right? That 10-year wasn't pulled out of a hat by magic. Normally, within 10 years, you're gonna start a family, you're gonna get a mortgage. There's different expenses that come at the end of that. So what I tell the students at DeSales is when they graduate, if you could do it in the 10 years, do it and get it over with, right? Because you owe the federal government. They're gonna find you, so you can repay them. So if you're able to pay it ahead of time. The income-based repayment, they entice a lot of students because it says, you qualify for minimum payments, you could actually qualify for 0 payments. At the end of 20 or 25 years, whatever you haven't paid on that loan is gonna get canceled. But you have to spend all that time paying interest on that loan. So if you're able to pay it within 10 years, same thing will be for the plus loan, pay it. Income-based repayment is really good if you are gonna be in a career that you're gonna be making little money the whole career. If not, it's very tricky. And the government probably doesn't want to say that, but I just think it's really unfortunate for somebody to pay 20 years interest only and say, still owe exactly the same as year 1. And the other thing that they're not advertising is, whatever the amount that gets forgiven, gets a balloon payment. So whatever they're forgiven on that loan, they're gonna tax you. The other reason why, on income-based repayment is laws change. So, what if something changes here and they're no longer honoring that? And, like, if it's public service, make sure if your student is going into public service that the agency or employer qualifies to be one of the agencies that will get the loan forgiveness. Because what happens is, and you've probably heard on the news lately, they've been working 10 years at these agencies and hospitals and schools. They're now applying to get their loan forgiven. They don't qualify because all along this school or this hospital didn't qualify. So you want to make sure that if that's the sacrifice that you're making in order to get that benefit, that you will qualify for it at the end of the year.
You would be surprised on the, it was less than 1% of applicants were approved after 10 years. So it exists, and I would advise a student, if you're going into public service, you do that because that's your passion. You don't necessarily go into public service hoping to get public service loan forgiveness on your federal student loans. Because it may not be there, you may not qualify, you do it because it drives you right? That industry drives you, not for the opposite, because it might not exist. And I think we're basically done. I just, we'll leave this presentation too, so you can click on some of the links. You certainly have plenty of resources as well. I wanna be mindful of the time too.
Is there any questions that you had that we didn't cover?
Or do we overwhelm you with so much information that now it's a little.
Okay, so if you live here, the only one thing that I want you to remember is you don't pay for free money, right? So if they guarantee you they're gonna give you money, don't pay. Apply early, so you could get the best cookies. And, there is always resources to help. It's in everybody's best interest to help you, so don't ever be afraid to ask. And I've been in financial aid 24 years, so your circumstances, we've heard of it before. So don't ever feel embarrassed to bring it up, and have that one-on-one conversation with the schools, because we truly want your students. So, but I also want you, I'm taking my hat off now and I'm putting I have a senior that's studying college. Don't be afraid to have those conversations with your students where you say, this is not a fit for you financially, we can't do this, right? Because you might make that sacrifice year one, but then that income to debt ratio comes in, and it's very, very sad when a student has that grade for 3 years, and now there's no possibility of paying for year 4. So have honest conversation with your kids, analyze your finances, and there's options. But don't put yourself at risk, your retirement and the student at risk, because you want them to go to this particular school. There's a lot of options. So if you leave here with anything, apply to plenty, compare everybody. Like Gary said at the beginning, do not discount private schools, because we do discount a lot of that. So for example, last year, DeSales is 58,000. Our discount rate was almost 50% of that you got in scholarship and grants. So when you're comparing, apply, and then decide once you get your award letter. Any questions on it?
Probably maybe a dumb question, but my son, if I apply like October, he'll be a senior. So are they looking then when, for scholarships, like they're just gonna take like GPA and they're gonna look at everything up to like when you're applying, like at that point, or do they wait a little bit? Do they, do they want
We already
anything more?
notified, we've sent out from DeSales, close to 1,000 award letters already for the senior, for people starting in September.
So they're, okay, so senior year really, grades, not really.
No, and it used to be that you have to make a decision by May 1st. Some of that have, for private colleges, you have to decide what college you were going. Some of that have changed. So your students are very lucky because some of the guidelines and restrictions that private colleges have gone away. In the past, May 1st, if you deposited and you said you were coming to DeSales, Moravia, Muhlenberg, nobody could come to you because you're already committed to us. This year that rule is gone, so I have a feeling that you're gonna get a lot of more approaches after May 1st. So you have options. And when you're analyzing award letters, make sure you do it on the bottom line. Because just because you see so-and-so is giving you 30,000 and this school is only giving you 20, it might be that the cost here is 10 more. So it might be the same. So compare it to the bottom line.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And just one quick last thing, we're doing another financial aid workshop March 24th. We're just doing a series of these, and the next one is the college funding curve. So, more questions, different perspectives. I'm looking for that March 24th. Same time, same place. But thank you so much for tonight. It was very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. There's information here on this back table, that FSA ID sheet back here, and tools. So help you with the information. Right when you said that, I was like, oh. I didn't even grab. Evelyn,